Yeah, I want to welcome everybody. I want to welcome Lew Zuchman. Lew Zuchman is the 1967, 61 graduate of City College.
No, 1967.
That's what I was going to say. 1967 graduate of City College. But before he graduated from City College, and in part while he was a student here, Dr. Zuchman was an activist. He was an organizer. He was a movement leader in the civil rights movement. And over the course of the semester in the class that the students who are here will know, we've been talking about the history of student activism, student power building, organizing, movement participation from City College to make change at this college and to make change in our society. And so we end the course this semester with someone who is as strong and inspiring an exhibit as someone who has done that, as anyone probably alive right now who's a graduate of City College. I'm going to invite Dr. Zuchman over the course of our conversation to tell his story, so I'm not going to do an elaborate introduction. But for those of you who are here to know that he was a freedom rider. He was a part of a movement to desegregate interstate travel and buses in the South of this country, and part of a movement for civil rights for Black Americans in all areas of this country. So thanks for being with us today. Dr. Zuchman, start maybe by just telling us about life growing up. Life in New York City, how you found your way around the city as a young man, and how you found your way to activism.
Okay. I was born in Forest Hills, Queens. I don't know how many of you are from Queens, but I'm going to go back to, we had our 50th, this is the 60th anniversary of the Freedom Rise, but our 50th anniversary, I was down in Jackson, Mississippi, and Reverend Olin Brooks, who was head of the Mississippi Veterans of the Civil Rights Movement, a prominent pastor in Jackson, Mississippi, he did an autobiography of me. And when he finished, he said, you know, Lou, if you weren't a Freedom Rider, you would have been dead or in jail by the time you were 25. And I remember saying, what the hell is he talking about? And I was sort of shocked. And then he hugged me. And on my plane ride back to New York, we were organizing our anniversary. I started thinking about that because I never thought about that, and I continue to think about that. So let me tell you, I think first of all, he's right. He was right. I never thought about that being a freedom rider helped save my life, and so I've been thinking about that for the last 10, 11 years. So I'll just tell you a little bit. I grew up in Forest Hills, Queens. An immigrant community of Jewish folk coming from Europe prior to World War II and the pogroms. I remember when I was 5, 6 years old, the first time I went to synagogue, Yom Kippur's, the Jewish holiday where we celebrate the death, we mourn the death of loved ones. I remember being in the synagogue and people were crying. I said to my mother, Mom, what's going on here? And it was terrible. I can't tell you the pain in that room. But I had that pain too. My father committed suicide when I was 2.5. My mother was very abusive physically and emotionally. I was not a happy child. I remember, however, in the first grade at PS3, the public school I went to in Forest Hills, Miss Landau, who was a very nice person, asked each of us, what is your name and what does your father do? She wasn't aware some of us didn't have fathers, and I was very humiliated. What am I going to say? My father killed himself. I don't have a father, but in Forest Hills, there was an orphanage called the Brooklyn Home for Children. So back then, very often, you didn't go into foster care when your parents couldn't take care of you. You'd be in these quote orphanages. And Johnny, our school was almost all Jewish, but there were a couple of African American, Latino young people who lived in this Brooklyn Home for Children. So Johnny Jaws, who was African American, said, when it came to him, he said, my name's Johnny Jaws, I don't have a father. And Miss Landau said, everyone has a father. And he told her to go F herself. And I don't remember what I said, but I remember, when school was over that day, I went into the schoolyard and I went over to Johnny and Pedro Hernandez, another Black Puerto Rican young man who was from the home. We became best friends. And as I grew up, I had my Jewish friends and my home friends, and two very different groups of people. I felt much more part of the kids from the home because we all got into trouble in school. We were all suspended. And my Jewish friends, many ended up here. So as I grew up, I got an F in conduct every year in the principal's office all the time, very angry. Had a right to be angry, but I didn't express it well, nor did I understand it. Fortunately, for some crazy reason, my idol became Jackie Robinson. I tell you that because at 6, he had first broke the color line when I was 6. I don't even know if I understood that completely, but as I grew up, he became my father figure. I loved him. Not just because he was a great baseball player, because he was a fighter. And the first book I ever read was his biography. And what really impressed me was that he had a bad temper like me. And I could not understand how he could have put up with the crap he had to put up with to be the first African-American in the major leagues. And I mean it. I couldn't understand it. He's 6'1", he's strong. How do you let people spit on you and not fight back, right? And I would fight in a second if you looked at me the wrong way. So he was my idol in life. As I grew up, by the time I was in middle school, I was in juvenile justice. I've been arrested. I was in the juvenile justice system, and my life was not moving in a good direction. I was placed into what the city created, these 600 schools, where they took the worst kids in each borough and put us all in one class. Put us in one school, I'm sorry. So I dropped out of school. I'd gone away to University of Bridgeport. God knows why. I lasted about 2 months. I'm home and I'm watching TV and I see Jackie Robinson. And it was a show called Open End. They were discussing the Freedom Rides. So the Freedom Rides, as Andy mentioned, we were challenging the fact that in Mississippi and other southern states, the bus terminals and waiting rooms and bathrooms were all segregated by race, but the federal government had laws which said you couldn't do that. So what we did is we felt if you're going interstate, like if I'm taking a bus from New York to Mississippi, Mississippi can't do that because the federal law should predominate, but the southern states disagreed. So we were challenging this and hoping to bring that to court. So the first bus came from New York going through Alabama, and it was firebombed in Anniston. And the whole bus blew up, everyone got out. Within a minute or two, everyone would have been burned to death. The second bus in Montgomery, Alabama was attacked by the KKK. Everyone beaten up. John Lewis, our congressman who passed away recently, was on that bus. Almost everyone was put in the hospital, and the police and the FBI was on every bus because they knew, we told them which buses we were taking. So the Freedom Rides stopped. Everyone felt it was too dangerous. And this show is the discussion of the Freedom Rides continued. I had no idea about the Freedom Rides. All I knew was one of my best friends was Black and Puerto Rican from the home. And at the end of the show, a couple of civil rights leaders were cautioning it's too dangerous to continue. Jackie Robinson, who unfortunately was a Republican, Jackie Robinson, with a tear in his eye, said, if these young people feel this is the time to stand up, who are we to tell them not to? So the next morning I volunteered to be a Freedom Rider, went down to the Congress of Racial Equality offices, volunteered. I never thought they would accept me. They asked me if I was nonviolent. I said, absolutely not. But I mean, I wasn't, but they did accept me, which incidentally is not a sign of a well-run organization. I'm serious. So I went on the Freedom Ride.
Can I grab you?
Sure.
So, you know, some really awful things are happening in our society today, and we have the chance to watch the news and see how horrible they are, and a lot of us spend 2 minutes off to go back to our life. It's a big deal that you saw this piece and you realized you wanted to kind of stop your life and involve yourself in this struggle. So can you just say a little bit more about how did that happen in your head?
That's a good question. I was not at all intellectual. I didn't know the difference between a Republican and a Democrat. My goal in life was to be the first Jewish person made into a mafia family. I'm serious. So but I had a fierce sense of what's right. And I remember when those little girls were taken to Little Rock, the little girls brought to school when they try to desegregate the schools in Little Rock, and see these dirty sons of people cursing at these little 6, 7-year-old girls, threatening them. I was furious. So the same way I felt, when I saw that bus attacked in Montgomery by the KKK, I want to go down there and fight. So this was like an emotional response, Andy. I think my sense of, as I understand it now, my sense of the way I was abused as a child, and I had a terrible childhood. My mother was a catastrophe. And my identification with the young people in the home who were put in our neighborhood, well, they're from the home, as if, there's you're bad because your parents couldn't take care of you. So it was that kind of identification with my friends. These are my friends. And I wanted to fight. So it was an emotional response. I didn't think about it. I just went down that next day and was accepted. Although they would accept anyone. In America, there were 350 Freedom Riders from California to Los Angeles. The Freedom Ride started in May of '61, and we continued to come down in buses. So what happened, let me explain that. So what happened was, after these first 2 buses were firebombed and attacked, there was an agreement with the state of Mississippi that when the buses came into Mississippi, we would be protected by the Mississippi National Guard and arrested and put into prison. And Parchment State Penitentiary is a state penitentiary in Mississippi, considered one of the worst, if not the worst, prison in America. Although I can tell you things that I was in prison here in New York, and New York's every bit as bad. Anyway, so the deal was that when we got into the bus terminal in Jackson, the white Freedom Riders were going to the black waiting room, black Freedom Riders were going to the white waiting room, and Sheriff Ray, the chief of police in Jackson, you all need to move on. We refused. If you don't move on, we're going to cuff you and lock you up. So we were all arrested, and we were put into first the city jail, then the county jail. And when we went for arraignment, we were given a fine, and then we'd have to go to trial for the breach of peace. That's what we were arrested for. We refused to pay the fine, so they incarcerated us for 40 days. They thought that would scare us off, once we saw that we're all gonna have to go to jail for 40 days, the rides would end, but that wasn't what happened. So I didn't go. The first buses were again at the end of May, and I went in early July. And so I went on my journey. When I think,
Can I just
sure.
let's broaden the lens a little bit for folks who don't have a sense of time, history, as much as you live. So the broader controversy of civil rights, where were we when you got involved in that? I don't even know if you understood that you were in
it wasn't called the Civil Rights Movement. So interesting. The Civil Rights Movement supposedly started theoretically in the sit-ins, which were black Southern students sitting in say, a restaurant where you weren't allowed to be. So the sit-ins were the beginning of in retrospect, the beginning of civil rights movement were the sit-ins, which were black students, generally historic black college students down south, who challenged the segregation laws of the South. We're considered, the Freedom Riders were considered the beginning of the civil rights movement. God knows why. Although in part it may be because white people came down, not just black people. And whenever white people got involved, it got more attention, sadly, unfortunately, which continues till today. But it wasn't, we didn't, you know, even years after, I didn't think this was a big deal. I only took about 12 years ago. So you have to, this was 60 years, 12 years ago. That's the first time I discovered that, you know, so freedom rides were considered the beginning of the civil rights movement. So at this point, there was, it wasn't a movement yet, I guess. It was just beginning to happen. What? Yes.
So in your campaign, who were you fighting against? And what do you, as you can remember this, what was success look like?
I wasn't thinking that clearly. I was just angry, and I was going to stand up. And who was I fighting? Assholes who you know, intimidate little girls trying to go to school. I can't tell you. I don't know if any of you saw the footage of these little girls going to Little Rock. It's unbelievable. It's just disgusting. It was that anger, and I was going to stand up. There's no way. I didn't care. Now look, when you're young, you do foolish things. But I was young, and I was just standing up. There was no, you know, I really had no political sense of what was going on. I just did what I felt was right. And I think in a way, that's why Owen Brooks said how important this was to me, because I was going to be a gangster. That was my goal in life. But I also believed in equality. You know, I didn't want to see anyone treated bad the way I felt I was treated as a young man. So just quickly, the bus ride was uneventful until we got to Memphis. Now, we were told not to tell people we were freedom riders until we got to Mississippi in the waiting room when we would get arrested. And when I think back on that, that was terrible. We were in regular buses with normal people who had no idea they were freedom riders on those buses. So we put their lives at risk, which I think is disgusting. And when the bus was coming into Memphis, I think there were 6 of us, 6 freedom riders. We were all separate. We didn't sit together. There was an argument in the back. One of the freedom riders was arguing with some white merchant marine who just got off a boat. He had a big gun in his front belt, and something about, you know, race relations. And everyone on the bus is like this now. And there was a black serviceman in front of this white merchant marine, and he says, "Tell him we love you," and knocks the guy's hat off. And this African-American soldier was gonna lay this guy out. You could see he was like this. And there were 2 white sailors sitting across from him. They were on leave from the Navy. And they were from down south, and they were somewhat racist. But I'll never forget this. They said, "Hey, are you a freedom rider?" And I didn't say anything. And they said, "We got your back." I'll never forget that. And I mean this now. See, because you see, even in Mississippi, white racists, so-called white supremacists, when they get to know you, now you're a human being. And they meant it. So when we went into that bus terminal, that black serviceman went into the white bus terminal. You know what courage that took? So people say, we were courageous. This man was courageous. And he sat down next to me. I still don't know why he, you know, I don't know if he thought I was a freedom rider or not, but he was a hero. This guy risked his life to stand up and understand all this nonsense that we were heroes is baloney. The real heroes are people that every day do what he did. And then you should read, how many of you are basketball fans? Bill Russell's father. Bill Russell has a book on his life. He talks about how his father stood up down south over and over, risking his life, not letting white racists treat him with disrespect. Anyways, we got into the bus terminal in Jackson, 5:30 in the morning on a Sunday. Trust me, there was nobody there. We got arrested. We were incarcerated. Spent 40 days in jail. Just quickly, those 40 days were shocking to see the level of hatred towards us. It was really shocking. I mean, they hated us, particularly the Jews. They hated us more than they hated the blacks. They hated us in a way that was just a judge spit. I'll never forget. I'm in shackles and a judge spits on me. I said, "This is the judge that just spit on me. What is it like to be in Mississippi?" Right? And I really mean, you begin to really realize how frightening it is. And for the first time in my life, I was scared. I thought I was tough, but that was scary. I realized they could kill you in a second. And they do. And in jail, there was a black minister above me who had been in jail for 14 years for trying to protect one of his parishioners from some white KKK police officers. Never went to trial. 14 years in jail. It took us another 12 years to get him out. That was Mississippi. Mississippi's a scary place. We all know about Medgar Evers, yes, who was head of the NAACP, who was murdered. Every year, the head of the NAACP in Mississippi was murdered, and their bodies dropped in the Pearl River every single year. So Mississippi was a scary place. I got out of jail. I come home, and my mother passes away, and that's how I got to City College. So I want to talk about that. Yep,
That's a lot. You just said that last sentence. And I wonder, you get out of jail. Again, I know a lot of years have passed, but where was your head at? So it sounds like you came back north.
Well, when I came out of jail, I felt a real, it was an education to be in jail for 40 days with people who were activists. Almost all the civil rights leaders were in jail with me, whether it was Jesse Jackson, John Lewis, etc. I was the youngest white freedom rider. LaVaughn Brown, who's a close friend of mine, was the youngest black freedom rider. I was 19, LaVaughn was 16. So I came out with a real education and a commitment to do this work, but also to be involved in organized crime. You may think I'm crazy, but that's why I had 2 goals in life. No, and then my mother, who would not say goodbye to me when I left, because she was furious at me, and would not say hello to me when I came back, died shortly thereafter. And so at 19, I was an orphan, no mother or father, but I had the apartment. I was a farmer. And my uncle Earl, who went to City College. Now, incidentally, so City College has always been part of my life, because my uncle Earl, who was like a father figure to me, he graduated from here. My uncle Ben also graduated from here. So to us in the Jewish community, and I mean this, you can't understand how important City College was to all of us. As I know it is to you all, who are also from very often from immigrant communities in other countries. City College was, when I grew up, it was as good as Harvard to all of us. And I mean it, getting in here was like the most important thing in the world. Now, I didn't get in because I belonged in. There used to be at City College, which concerns me, it's not this way now, there was an evening school. I got into the evening school. I never would have gotten into the day school. But if you did well in the evening school, you could go into the day school eventually. So I went to City, but the other reason I was very excited about coming to City, and I want to talk about that, beyond the fact that, as I hope you all know, the greatest Americans all came out of City College, I can't tell you. And not just Jewish folk. Herman Badillo, who was, in my opinion, the most prominent Puerto Rican elected official in the history of New York, City College graduate. I could go on and on. Dr. Kenneth Clark, first African-American professor at City College, the most prominent psychologist in the history of America, City College. All right. So there's so much to be proud of to be here. But for me, I was a basketball player despite my diminutive size. And I don't know how many of you know this story, but you should really know this story. Back in the 50s, City College had a team, all African-American Jewish players. And in that year, I can't remember exactly which year it was, but City College won the NCAA and NIT tournaments, the only college in the history of America to win both of those tournaments, with an all-black Jewish team. And if you don't think that upset America, you're wrong. And when we beat Kentucky at Madison Square Garden with an all-white team, the City College uniforms were like sort of University of Kentucky comes out with first of all, everyone was like 6'8", 6'9", with these beautiful white uniforms, with these beautiful layup lines, and our guys were like totally disorganized, you would think. And when, before the game started, they announced the lineup, the Kentucky players refused to shake hands with the City College players. And we beat them by 20-some-odd points. And then we went on to win the NIT. The only school in the history of America to do that with a black Jewish team. But City College paid a price. Because within 2 years, almost that whole team got arrested For what? Supposedly for dumping games, losing, which is not true. A book was just written a couple of years ago by, his last name was Goodman, a wonderful book on this, about how these young men, Black and Jewish, from the poorest communities in New York, were exposed to gamblers by working up in the mountains, up in the Catskills, where all the Jewish resorts were, where all the Jewish hoodlums and gangsters were, where I was. And these young men would wait on the tables with these guys and were exposed to this. And then during the summer, the different hotels would play games and the Jewish gamblers would bet serious money on it. And these young men were playing in these games. So it wasn't any wonder that when they ended up here, they were approached by these gentlemen who would say, City College is favored by 19 points, win by less than 19. See if you win by, all right, and we can win a lot of money and you'll get a lot of money. And these guys were given a tremendous amount of money. These were young men from very poor families, from Bronx, Queens, right? So almost everyone was arrested. But let me tell you what ultimately, and the other thing was, particularly the Black players, everyone was saying they didn't deserve to be at City College, they weren't smart enough. See, the Jewish guys are smart enough, the Black players weren't. They were only here because they were basketball players. But let me just tell you something. Almost every one of them returned here after being in jail, and almost everyone graduated. Joe Gallagher, first Black elected official in the Bronx, first state senator, played on the City College team. Erwin Dambrock became a dentist. Floyd Lane, I could go on, became a principal, came back to coach this team. Almost everyone on that team came back. We should be celebrating this on a very powerful level. And I really mean it, because it could have only happened at City College. And I really mean it could have only happened here because of the legacy of City College. So I can't tell you how excited I was to come back here as a student and play on the night team. See, because the night team was much better, because what happened after the scandal was they de-emphasized basketball at City College. So City College was never allowed to play at a high level. But when I came here, the night coach was Bobby Sand, who was the assistant coach on the team that won the NCAA and NIT tournament. Did Andy want to?
Well, I was just back here, Sean, because I'm trying to picture you. You're 19, 20 years old. Been, an activist in the civil rights movement. It's just in its formation. You've been in prison, come out. You come back, your mom has passed. You still want to be a gangster. I can't make it all fit together. How did all that come together for you? If you remember it, and then you ended up at college. Except you had these two loans.
Well, look, I continued to want to be a gangster until I was in my late 20s. So while I was at City, going to night school was wonderful because I could sleep late, get up, go to class, and then do my shit at night. So yeah. So when I got through here, I would go to the pool halls, play poker, be involved in after-hours clubs. I'm not proud of this, but so I slowly worked my way up in organized crime. And if any of you saw Goodfellas, I was like Henry Hill, and the guys took me in because they all knew I didn't have parents. And so, as Owen Brooks said to me, Lou, you would have been dead or in jail by the time you were, because I went to City College from 61 through 67. I graduated in 67. In my last semester, I got arrested 3 times in 1 week. My last semester here, 3 times in 1 week, I got arrested. That's how deep I was in with some really, really big time people. I was making incredible amounts of money, but I would have ended up dead. There's no question. Why? Part of it was my search for a father. I think most of all, I want to, and mafia guys, these were men. And they did take me, they took me under their wing. I remember once I was passing out cards for an after hours club at this pool hall I would hang out, and this guy Rocky who owned the pool hall, what are you doing in my club? You don't pass out no shit in my club, puts me up against the wall, slugs me. I go back to Richie, this guy who ran the after hours club, go back to his place that night. I said, you know what Rocky did to me, man? He put me against the wall, hit me. He did what? A week later, I come back to the pool hall, it's closed. And I say, what happened to the pool hall? Didn't you hear me? These guys came in last week, threw Rocky head first down a flight of stairs. He's going to call me in the hospital and broke every pool table. So these are the people I was involved with. This was terrible. And unfortunately, I can't explain it. I was not very healthy at that point in my life. I was very angry on one level, searching for a father, but also fighting, I was still very involved with civil rights. I would speak, I would go around the country speaking as a ex-Freedom Rider. So I graduated city, and I was very lucky. My first job was in East Harlem. In 1967, I got a job at Casino Maria on 102nd Street in East Harlem in Carver Houses. And I was very lucky. I love basketball, and if you love basketball, in the 60s, Harlem was heaven. Best basketball players in the world were right here. And I mean, it's absolutely right here. So I started coaching young men who were phenomenal players. I mean, I went to Forest Hills High School. We had a very good team. Every year we'd be in the quarterfinals, semifinals, and city championship, but we couldn't touch the guys from Harlem or Bed-Stuy. So in working with these young men around basketball and beginning to try to help them realize, only 1 out of every 100 of you ever going to get into the NBA. What about what's going to happen to the 99? You got to do your schoolwork. You got to study for SATs. They didn't even know what the SATs were. Slowly, in working with these young men, I began to, begin to see myself, and was ashamed I was ashamed of what I was doing there. So I would never tell them what I was doing. I had a new Lincoln Continental, 4-door. You have to understand, Lincoln Continental was the most expensive car in the world. That's the kind of money I was making. A new 4-door Lincoln Continental, everything in it. But I was ashamed because I knew my guys would think I was a gangster. And I was trying to help them do what's right in life, even though I wasn't. So slowly, I began to move my way out of this very slowly. But it was that experience working in East Harlem with young people where I began to see myself in them, begin to confront myself with some of the stupid stuff I was doing as I was trying to help them see the stupid stuff they were doing. And slowly, I began to realize I got to stop this other stuff. But it was after being arrested 3 times, which was very frightening because my life was at risk. The guys I was working for was afraid I would give them up. And I heard they were going to hurt me, and I realized this is not a family. This is not a family. I mean, I really understood this. Lou, these guys ain't going to be your father. They kill you in a second. Now, they may have thrown Rocky down the stairs, but they'll throw you down the stairs even quicker if you think you're going to give them up, which I was not going to do. But so I slowly began to realize I got to work my way out of this, which eventually I did. And I've worked in East Harlem now from 1967 till today. I'm the executive director of an organization called Scan Harbor. We're the largest youth program in East Harlem and Harlem. And it was that work that saved my life. So it was being a Freedom Rider, which began to give me, being a Freedom Rider gave me a chance to fight back against a world that I thought was unjust, which was. And then as I worked with other young people, not so much different than myself in this sense. I had a fractured family. Many of the young people I worked with had fractured families. I had trauma in my childhood. They had trauma in their childhood. And we're trying to find our way in the world, as you all are. And it was what healed me was to see myself and other people. And that's what Reverend Brooks was telling me. If I wasn't a Freedom Rider, I would have been dead or in jail, and it's true. So I thank God that I was a Freedom Rider. And I know that helped change my life.
I want to open it up in a minute, so if you have questions, please get them ready. Talk a little more about your time at City College. It seems that you've done the Freedom Rider work before you came here. You found yourself after you left. But some important stuff happened along.
Well, City College was a place that I immediately felt at home in. Part of it was I was Jewish, and almost all the students, 3/4 of the student body was Jewish. But also I was on a basketball team, and I was in Harlem where I wanted to be. So I loved it here. And also the student body was very progressive. So not as progressive as it used to be in Sunday, but it's still progressive. You know, back in the 30s and 40s, City College was a major communist quote front organization. I mean, we were, City College was wonderful. So it was exciting for me to be here, but most of all, I was with young people like myself. We all came from a working class and poverty communities. We all were struggling to make it in life. We weren't sure how we were going to do it. Being on the basketball team was really important to me. Basketball was very important to me. And I always felt part of City College. I can't explain it. It was very strange. It just, you know, almost from the moment I was on campus, I felt good here. And I felt like I was part of young people. We were all struggling to make it in life. And I really mean this now. And none of us were sure we were going to make it. None of us knew how we were going to make it. And then there was the Apollo Theater. So every Wednesday night what I remember is every Wednesday night at the Apollo Theater was amateur night. I don't know if any of you have been at amateur night, you should go because there was amateur night again somewhere. And I would cut my classes every Wednesday night to go to the Apollo Theater, as the whole basketball team. We all cut our classes Wednesday, went to the Apollo. So I don't know, I can't explain. Being in City College was just, I was telling Andy, my internship was at Manhattanville Houses, which is on Amsterdam and 130s. I loved it there. I was there for a year working with young people after school as part of I was a sociology major. It was home to me. And almost immediately, it was a place that I felt kinship with other students, and it was really a special place.
And you've been teaching for a lot of years. I wonder if you might comment on what you see as the student experience here, maybe advice for these guys on how to take best advantage of this place, and how it compares with what it's like in the years.
Well, again, I started teaching here about 10, 12 years ago. My best friend, Art Spielman, who also went here and was an esteemed member of the psych department with Dr. Mallory. Art and I grew up together in Forest Hills. We were best friends. We went to City together. He was a little younger than me. He would come to all my basketball games. And Art got his PhD and was teaching here for quite a while. And for some crazy reason, I was teaching at Hostess Community College for 15 years. Oh man, you got to come to City College. And he introduced me to Dr. Mallara, which was, and I could never understand why Art did this all of a sudden. And so I came here, and let me tell you something. I enjoyed teaching here from the first day I got here, because you all were me, I was you. So it was different than other places I've been. I mean, it was something. Maybe I'm just being romantic, but I felt I was inspired by you all, but I guess also being here reminded me of being here. It was a wonderful experience for me. And then coming back, I felt, coming back here, I was annoyed that there wasn't a real evening program anymore. And I think City needs to do something about that. See, because when you come to work, where do you eat? Right? Now, I wasn't working, so it didn't matter, but the other students were working. So when you came, what did you do? You had a 6 o'clock class, you got here at 5:30. We used to have a snack bar, man. Alumni Hall. We had all the buildings have changed, but being back here was I can't explain it. It felt good in a very special way, and it has. It's been I enjoyed. If I wasn't paid, don't let Dr. Mallory hear it. If I wasn't paid, I'd still be teaching.
That's great. I'm glad you're. And what about the struggle for civil rights? You came back from being a freedom rider, watched the civil rights achieve a certain set of goals. We're still fighting for civil rights, and I wonder if you might comment on how your understanding of the struggle for racial justice in this country has evolved over time, and where do you think we are?
Well, I'm happy you asked that question. So when I was at our 50th anniversary, I was asked this question over and over: aren't you proud of what you all achieved? So let me be honest, no. I've worked in East Harlem now since 1967. And I've only seen things get worse and worse and worse. So that's a lie. we have achieved nothing. And I say this sincerely. In fact, things have gotten so much worse that at many of my community centers, we're in 7 different housing developments in East Harlem, Wagner Houses, East River, Martin Luther King Towers, etc. There is no males left. Everyone's in jail. And these young men are no different than I was. They shouldn't be in jail. And they're in jail because we live in a racist, unjust society that comes down on us in so many different ways, you can't even figure it out. In East Harlem, 80% of students are reading below grade level. 80% of the students are performing below grade level in math. This has been that way for 30 years. The incarceration rate in America has increased 300% over the last 30 years. And who's going to jail? I don't understand what's gotten better. I say this sincerely. I could go down, I can give you thousands of statistics, which is going to tell us how much worse it is. I was meeting with one of my staff today. Do you know the suicide rate amongst Black young men has tripled in the last 2 years? No one wants to talk about it. Why is that happening? Cornel West, 30 years ago, wrote in his book, Introduction to Race Matters, there were 3 white suicides to every 2 Black suicides. And then within 10 years, he talked about how that was changing. Look what it is now. I've had 2 of our young men commit suicide in the last 5 years. I have had 10 of my young men murdered, and they have murdered people too. So are they animals? No. They're no different than I was when I was growing up. But I didn't grow up in a neighborhood where there were guns. I didn't grow up in a neighborhood where if my brother was killed, trust me, I would have done whoever did to my brother. All right. So our young people are growing up in communities where it is very difficult to survive. And it's not just our young men that are being taken down. Our young men get married to young women, and they have children. You know what it's like to visit your father in prison? Go out to Rikers one day and take a look. You'll see hundreds of young Black and Latinx young ladies with little children, like they're going to the beach. And when you get close to those prisons, where the prisoners are, it's scary. The cursing, the yelling. No child should go through this. No one cares. I could go on and on. So very simply, I think this need for us to say we've made progress is factually incorrect and something we need to work very hard at changing. I don't expect everyone to be as upset as I am, because some of my upset is because I feel, this was done to me, and I'll fight against that as long as I live. But to see it done to other young people who I've tried to help, young people who I know no different than I was, who don't have a chance, and I really mean that. Your brother gets killed. You all a little too young, but Manhattanville and Grant Houses on 125th Street, Manhattanville is here in 130th. They've been fighting for 20 years. No one gives a shit. No one goes in there and tries to stop it. No one goes in there to get to know these young people. There have been 20, 30 murders over this period. And about 8, 10 years ago, a young lady from our program, Chicken Murphy, the best female basketball player in New York, she and 2 of her friends from Grant beat up some young people from Manhattanville. That night, they came back and killed her. 3 years later, then her brother went back and killed one of them. He wasn't arrested. Several years later, they arrested her brother for killing the guy who killed her. New York Times had an article how tragic it was that the parents of Chicken Murphy's, her parents who saw their daughter murdered now have to go to a murder trial for their son. But it also mentioned a lot of Harlem residents are very upset about this because the NYPD arrested 110 young men from these 2 developments. 110, which is almost every male in both developments between the ages of 18 and 25. Just about everyone. Arrested 110 for conspiracy to commit violence. Only 9 of them actually committed any violence. The other 101 were supposedly members of crews in both projects. Had done nothing. Everyone was sitting in jail. Every single one. This is not progress. Go to a criminal court, take a look at who gets indicted. It tears you up. So I have to say, I see no I think we have, rather than make progress, I think we've lost progress. And I really mean this. I can just tell you, since I've been in East Harlem, I've seen more violence, more murder. I've seen more young people killed in the last 10, 15 years than I saw in the first 35 years. The deterioration of our school system. We all know what happened during the pandemic. Who died? Who died? It was your relatives and the relatives in our communities who died. The people who had to go to work, the first responders. It wasn't the privileged folk. It was our people, and that's all wrong. So whether we look at what happened in the pandemic, whether we look at our school system, in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education was passed. There's more segregation in public schools in America today than there was in 1954. So whatever measure we want to use, I think we're losing. I don't say this to be depressed or to get everyone upset, but I do say this, that I don't feel we've made progress of any meaningful amount. And I think this need to continue to say that is to obfuscate the fact that there isn't an equal opportunity for too many of us.
So let me ask you this, and then we'll look it up. What, if anything, gives you hope? And if you were sitting where these guys are and trying to think about how to be part of the movements for change that you've been a part of, how would you suggest that we engage?
You guys, you are the hope. And I don't say this just to kiss up to you all. One, you know, I left the civil rights movement in part because of a lot of stuff going on that I wasn't happy with. And I felt like my life should be helping one person at a time, helping people survive this oppressive, unjust world. So that's what gives me hope. What hurts me, and you guys give me hope. What hurts me at points, Andy, is when I was younger, I was able to help most of the young people, and I really mean it now, most of the young people in my program. Now to see one young man jumped in the East River a few years ago. He was walking with two girls, we called them Woo. And he said to them, "No one loves me," and jumped into the East River at 15. Killed himself. Not being able to, you know, do anything to change that. Another young man, Charlie, I don't want to mention his last name, but who I was very close to, I was his godfather. He's now going to be in jail the rest of his life for killing somebody. That pains me, but then there are other young people that I've been able to. So what gives me hope is one person at a time, and you all give me hope. But we need to fight. You can't just make it for yourself. We are a world. You know, I teach a course, decolonizing mental health, and we all need to be decolonized. We need to understand that the world we're in is a world which is racist, oppressive, teaching the wrong values. You know, this pandemic is over to some extent, and yet the chancellor of the New York City Public Schools, we're going to do more virtual. No, we're human beings. We should be connected to each other. We are a collective. That's where our health is. That's where our strength is. It's frightening for me to see some forces literally encouraging us to be separate, encouraging us not to be part of something. So I guess part of being back at City College is feeling part of city. It makes you feel good. I'd like to see do more of that. I understand all the challenges we all face, but so what city gives me hope, you give me hope. Bob Millard, I always want you to know Dr. Millard is one of the finest people I've ever worked with. I really mean it. And let me say something. Now that I've been back at City for many years, you got mostly good professors. There are a few that shouldn't be here. There's only so much you can do. But I think most of the professors here care about you. Put in the work that I think is important and helps to nurture.
And I should say, I think everybody knows Bob Millard in this class, but there's folks who are in the class. Bob Millard is the chair of the Senate. I made all this possible today. So we have for questions. We got time for a few. Yeah. You mind introducing yourself and then speak loud.
You said that we have lost progress. I need to know what progress looks like to you? When did we have it the most?
Well, progress to me would be that, progress to me would be very simply that each of us have an equal opportunity to do well in life, and that we're not profiled, racially profiled. We're not treated differently because of the color of our skin or because of the community we live in. So during the pandemic, when everyone was supposed to wear masks and supposed to be, separated by 6 feet, you would see in Central Park, white folk partying on top of each other. But in East Harlem, on 117th Street off of Lexington Avenue, some of our young men want to celebrate someone's birthday. And they come downstairs and they're celebrating. And the police come and arrest all 12 of them. So progress to me is that ain't going on, right? Progress to me is that you don't have to be, we don't need Jackie Robinsons. We shouldn't need that. Progress to me would be that everyone has an equal opportunity to get a reasonable education. Everyone has an equal opportunity to be alive and not to experience the kind of trauma that too many of us have experienced. So progress to me is that America lives up to its Constitution, which we have never done, but we can hopefully one day. So that to me is progress. And anything short of that isn't, all right? Well, look, that's a very challenging question. I think first that we educate people to understand how difficult it is to grow up in our communities, and to begin to make those changes that are necessary so that we have an opportunity to grow up in a healthy manner. Right now, it is very, very difficult for that to happen. That's easy to say and very hard to do. And that really depresses me. I'm sincere. I can't tell you in 2 minutes what needs to be done. I can tell you we got to get rid of racism, poverty, and all the inequalities. We do, because it's not just one, it's all of this coming at our young people in our community. And never was there a better example than in the pandemic. I live in a wealthy white neighborhood in Manhattan. And if you all remember, at night at 6 o'clock, people would get out and bang the pots to show their appreciation to the medical first responders, right? And I remember I look out on my porch, I have a porch, people coming out their porch banging. And I'm saying, my God, I just lost 2 of my staff, lost their relatives. I can't tell you how many students at City College lost family. I'm saying, so here are these people celebrating with, on one level, applauding the health, nurses, doctors, and first responders. But what about the people that are dying? Does no one care about them? What about people that are dying? We can't even have funerals. You know what that does to you? You know how many of my staff have died? You know how many of my staff's relatives have died? So we live in, Dr. King, before he died, talked about 2 Americas. No one ever talks about that. The speeches he made in the last months of his life. He talked about 2 Americas. And he said, America's like this vast ocean of prosperity with these dotted with islands of desperation and despair and poverty. And East Harlem, Bed-Stuy, South Bronx are these islands of desperation and poverty that we make believe isn't there. And then we justify it by saying, well, everyone lives there, gangsters anyway. Well, that's not true. So how we change that is a tremendous challenge, because it isn't just any one thing. It is a confluence of economic, social, psychological factors that all are coming down on us and getting worse and worse and worse.
The only thing I can
especially one of my education stuff, I grew up, was surrounded by lives and history, that's overwhelming emotion, just because of what happened this weekend as well, Buffalo, just think this is a lot of controversy that's going on, and I was really very honored that you were on it at the Montana board with me, and I just wondered what is your opinion on the progress of the fight for racism in South Africa, what's your opinion to say here in the West?
Well, I'm happy you asked that. If we take a look at South Africa and Nelson Mandela, I got angry at Nelson Mandela, and then I have tremendous respect for him. I got angry because he couldn't change South Africa, but I have tremendous respect for him. I mean, I'm tearing up. Give me a second. I have tremendous respect for him because, he didn't have to go to jail. He didn't have to stand up, but he did. And, he could have been released from jail if he would have just said, I'm doing wrong, but he wouldn't. And then he comes out, and then he struggles to keep things from blowing up in South Africa. He knew if the ANC really revolted, that much of the black population of South Africans, the South African population would have been wiped out. So he was able to try to calm down the young folk who were very angry, as he was as a young man, and he got elected president. But then you take a look at South Africa. It's horrible down there. Go to the townships. You think things are bad here. Go to the townships and see what's going on there. It's horrible. And so I get angry at him. But then I say, there's only so much anyone can do. So I have tremendous admiration for him. I'm happy you brought this up because I go back and forth, but after seeing that play, which wasn't brilliant, but it was very moving. I guess what I remembered most of all is he was a young man who didn't have to, he was an attorney. He was an educated South African. He did not have to do what he did. Not only did he go to jail, but he could have gotten out. All he had to do was say, I renounce the ANC, I renounce revolution. But he wouldn't do that. 25 years he spent in prison. He didn't have to do that. And then when he came out, the courage he had to stand up to the ANC, to the violent factions of Zulu and others who wanted to fight, as I would have. So when I was a young man, I wanted to fight. And my best friends were Stokely Carmichael and Rap Brown. You guys are too young. Rap Brown was head of the Black Panthers. He's in jail, been in jail his whole life for murdering a police officer. And we used to play basketball together in Riverside Park. And when the Black Panthers started walking around the street with guns, I said, Rap, what are you doing, man? You say this is a racist world. You guys are walking the street with guns, they're gonna take you down in a second, which they did. So I admire Mandela because I understand this is not a perfect world and we only can control what we can control, right? And we need to be mindful of that. And we need to try to do the best we can in our lives to make this a better place. And I do think Nelson Mandela did the best he could to make South Africa a better place, but he wasn't able to. And we need to understand that particularly in this globalized world, racism, oppression is everywhere. Patriarchal, misogynistic, nasty shit is all over this world. And it keeps on reinforcing itself. And you guys are the people that can make that change. So I always say to young people, what is going to be your freedom ride? What are you going to do to make a difference?
It's a good message to end on. It's an honor to have you. And I think it means a lot. I hope for all of you to realize that this gentleman graduated from your college.
Bailey, so I had a 2.0.